Good morning, everybody. Hello, and thank you for joining us for the second day of your career in conservation. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, this three-day conference has been put together to help address the current skills gap of conservation accredited building professionals. You're going to hear from professionals working across the built heritage sector about how being conservation accredited can open new career paths and how the conservation accreditation process works for different accreditation bodies. We hope that it helps inspire you and encourages you to think about the importance of conservation and becoming accredited through the membership body most applicable to your professional life. We would like to thank our funders, Historic Environment Scotland and Glasgow City Council, for helping us to fund this event. I'm Taylor Crosswhiter, the Development Officer here at GCHD. And when I originally started putting this together, it was meant to be held in person last March, but obviously world events took over and we did have to cancel due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But we're happy to be able to host it again in this online format. And we'd like to thank all of our delegates and speakers for bearing with us. All the sessions are being recorded, so you'll be able to access them. I know that the lack of face-to-face interaction can be challenging with these online events, so please do introduce yourself in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen there. We'd love to hear who's joining and where you're joining from. As you can see, we've got a packed schedule today. First, we're going to hear from Colin Tennant, who is Head of Technical Education and Training at Historic Environment Scotland, on the importance of conservation accreditation and the upskilling of professionals working on our historic built environment. Then we're going to hear about the value of the accredited project team, from Liz Davison, who is the Senior Project Manager for the Macintosh Restoration at the Glasgow School of Art. We'll follow up these two talks with a Q&A session, so please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions you'll have, and then I'll put them to the speakers. We are going to be having small comfort breaks between the speakers, so you'll have plenty of opportunities to grab a cup of tea or coffee. Today it is the sad anniversary of when we first went into lockdown due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we will be observing the moment of silence, national moment of silence at 12 p.m. Along with the rest of the country. In the afternoon, then once we've had a short break after 12 p.m, we're going to be able to hear from two different accreditation bodies. One of them is the Conservation Accreditation Register for Engineers, and we're going to hear from Steve Wood talking about that. And then we're also going to hear from Susan Bradshaw, who is Head of Professional Development at ICON. Then in the afternoon, you'll be able to attend workshops put on by ICON and CARE about what you need to know if you'd like to pursue being accredited through their schemes. If you haven't already done so, please do register for the workshop you'd like to attend. We're going to be sending out reminder links for you to be able to sign up for those sessions soon. And I'm also going to put them in the chat function so that you'll be able to access them. We've got a lunchtime break scheduled into 2 o'clock, so workshops start at 2 o'clock. And while I know that many people will be delighted of a chance to get away from the screen during the lunch break, we have set up an informal networking area which will be available for about 1 o'clock. This is just going to be a relaxed Zoom meet. You can drop in, catch up with colleagues, introduce yourselves to people working across the sector. We can maybe discuss some of the things that have been raised in the morning sessions. So please join us if you'd like a little bit more of that face-to-face interaction with these online conferences. You'll be receiving an email with the links at about 11 o'clock, but I'll also post them here in the chat as well, so you'll have access. If you do get kicked out of any of the sessions or need to leave and come back, that's no problem. Just use the same link that you used to get in to come back in. And if you do have any problems, that is my email address there on the screen, taylor@glasgowheritage.org.uk. Just email me and I'll get you sorted out. All right, I think that's enough from me. So without further ado, I'm going to pass along to our first speaker, who's Colin Tennant. He works with Historic Environment Scotland as Head of Technical Education and Training. He's going to speak on the importance of conservation accreditation within the Scottish Historic Environment Skills Investment Plan and the upskilling of professionals working on our historic built environment. Take it away, Colin.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks to Taylor for our introduction and for inviting me to come along and speak to you all today. As Taylor mentioned, I'm going to speak about conservation accreditation and really focus on where it fits within the Historic Environment Skills Investment Plan, and hopefully introduce you to some of the actions that are included within that. As hopefully all you will realise, we are the lead public body for Scotland's historic environment. And as part of our remit and work, we are interested in the knowledge, skills and materials that are required to maintain and underpin the stewardship of Scotland's historic environment. And increasingly, we're looking at innovative ways that we can apply that knowledge and undertake training and education to help us achieve that aim. Although we're directly responsible for the 336 properties in care that we look after on behalf of Scottish ministers, our real area of interest encompasses all traditionally constructed buildings. For a long number of years now, we've realised that without the skills and expertise that we require to look after the properties in care being embedded in the wider construction sector, then we really don't have a hope of maintaining the vast range of traditionally constructed buildings and structures that form such a crucial part of our cultural heritage, but also play such an important role in our social, economic and environmental well-being within Scotland. Back in March 2019, the Historic Environment Skills Investment Plan and Action Plan were launched by Skills Development Scotland. This was quite a revolutionary moment, I think, for the historic environment. This was the first time that sorry, slides are moving on of their own accord. Hold on, see if we can go back. This was the first time that the historic environment sector had a devoted skills plan that was published and produced by the National Skills Agency, Skills Development Scotland. I think one of the issues that we've always had in the historic environment with regards to skills is that our sector is so diverse. It obviously covers lots of different aspects of the historic environment, and they actually overlap and merge into other sectors within the economy, such as tourism, education, construction, creative industries. So this was really the first opportunity where that broad aspect of skills investment within the historic environment had been brought together within one document that tried to look at the common issues that the historic environment faces with regards to skills, and then seek to address those issues across the whole of the skills supply line. So whilst the skills investment plan covers built environment, tourism, and museum sectors, what obviously my area of responsibility and remit really focuses on the built environment aspect of that, and conservation accreditation forms performs a key role within that particular part of the historic environment sector. I think the historic environment skills investment plan, was really I found it quite a step change for how skills are looked at within the sector. There's two main aspects to the skills investment plan. There's a mainstreaming agenda there, where things that traditionally would have been seen as being specialist, niche, expert skills, there's a definite acknowledgement that we need to get some of those skills back into the mainstream, to the broad education and training that goes on within the built environment sector, so that the whole sector is better equipped to deal with some of the issues that we see on a day-to-day basis around traditional buildings and the historic built environment. But at the same time, it also acknowledges the need for specialist knowledge, specialist provision, true expertise and true specialist knowledge being recognised as being of value. And I think that's where I see the relevance of the skills investment plan to conservation accreditation and certification. I don't see these two aspects as being contradictory. I think the sector needs to do both. We need to be able to broaden out the knowledge and expertise that exists in the wider sector, but also maintain and in many cases better recognise the specialist knowledge that's required to properly address some of the issues that we're facing with traditional buildings within the sector. And I think the historic what I really wanted to highlight today was, I think the historic environment skills investment plan provides an opportunity for practitioners within the sector and the professional bodies to really highlight what they are doing through their accreditation and certification schemes and demonstrate their worth and usefulness to Scottish Government and agencies such as Skills Development Scotland. There's three priority areas identified within the skills investment plan: engaging the sector in skills and innovation, attracting future talent and improving access, and workforce development. And these are seen as being the key areas that we all need to work together on, really just to ensure that we have the talent and numbers of people coming into the sector that we're going to need going forward to continue the work that we're all interested in seeing done. So what I was going to do today was really just take us through a few slides looking at some of the themes and a bit more detail on some of the actions I think particularly chime with conservation accreditation and certification. So the first theme is around engaging the sector in skills and innovation. And I think this is vital. There's two aspects of this for me. There's the need for the sector to embrace technology and be innovative and up for changing how we do things and how we deliver not just the work that we do on a day-to-day basis, but how we actually undertake skills and training. And it's also something there about presenting the sector and roles within the sector as being at the cutting edge and being interested in innovation, and showing that we're not just interested in traditional specialist and skills areas like that, but you can be interested in those areas and still be interested in being innovative and embracing new technology and new techniques. So I really think this is a theme where, again, conservation accreditation, both how the content of the accreditation process and how we deliver the training that underpins that, there's scope within the skills investment plan for us all to work together to ensure that we can benefit from these themes emerging from the skills investment plan. And one of the specific actions within the skills investment plan is to support existing employer workforce development initiatives for traditional and specialist skills. And I certainly think that conservation accreditation and certification fits within the parameters of that action. The second theme, attracting future talent and improving access. Again, it's about developing that pipeline of talent and ensuring the future workforce has the right knowledge and skills for working in the historic environment. I think one of the things that I've spoken about over the past few years is the fact that, and this is stealing a line from the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, is that we're in a war for talent. As we face the consequences of an ageing population and there being less young people available, we as a sector have to compete for those young people and demonstrate to them why our sector should be of interest to them. And part of that is being able to demonstrate that that our sector offers opportunities for continuous development, continuous learning, and it's actually a sector in which you never stop learning, and you're always, every project you work on, every building you encounter, every conservation area that you work within, they've always got something different and new to teach you, and that is quite an attractive area for young people when they're looking to pick a sector to work in. The fact that they can continue to develop and continue to train throughout the the length of their careers. And again, some of the specific actions in the skills investment plan are specifically around that whole aspect of providing work-based learning and training programs to enable people to progress within the sector. And again, I think conservation accreditation, the progression element of that enables us to demonstrate that our sector can do that for young people entering our area of work. I think another action that's related is the need for us, again, and this touches on the mainstreaming agenda, there's a need for us to make sure that those courses that are available for young professionals coming in to the sector, whether undergraduate or postgraduate level, that there's more content that's of direct relevance to the historic environment within those undergraduate and postgraduate courses. And I think if we could work together to try and address some of those issues, then maybe the leap from a graduate perspective to then conservation accreditation might not be as great as what it might currently be for some individuals who are coming out of our universities following their training. And then moving on to workforce development, and this I think really hits the nail on the head with regards to accreditation. Consideration should be given to developing accredited training that meets the business needs and organisations operating in the sector. And I think we're actually, you are part of the sector, the historic built environment part of the sector, with the number of accreditation and certification courses there are within our area. We're really ahead of maybe some other parts of the sector with regards to our ability to contribute under this theme. And again, there you can see some of the specific actions that are outlined in that theme around developing and enhancing CPD provision and availability. And I think that how we've all embraced online learning and online communication over the past 12 months, I think is really, again, a step change in how we can look at delivering and facilitating CPD across the sector going forward. I think another action you can see there is to establish industry-led working groups, including education and training partners to identify gaps in provision and develop business cases for more workforce development. And I think that is something that perhaps the built environment professional bodies and the conservation sector professional bodies could look at, coming together and looking at maybe providing a case to Skills Development Scotland to see how they could gain further support for some of the accreditation and certification work that's going on within this area. And I think you're engaging with existing and establishing formal networks to introduce new accredited and quality assured provision. I think events like today, again, contribute to the action, that particular action and this theme of workforce development. The fact that Glasgow City Heritage Trust have laid on an event like this today and got all the professional bodies together to demonstrate what is available to people within the sector and how people in the sector can be developed and develop themselves going forward. I think it just demonstrates how well aligned this area of work is with obviously the strategic aims and objectives of the skills investment plan and action plan. So just really to summarise, I think the skills investment plan provides an opportunity for us collectively to demonstrate the importance of specialist knowledge and the value of conservation accreditation. It gives us an opportunity to invest how we can use conservation accreditation further within the sector. And I think conservation accreditation gives us a great starting point to work together to come up with some more solutions for some of the themes and actions that are identified within the skills investment plan. And I think it does give us a great platform to work together to identify what needs to happen to ensure delivery of the skills investment plan and action plan. obviously, with what's happened in the past 12 months, there's been a bit of a halt in terms of some of the delivery around the actions in the skills investment plan. But it's just to highlight to you all that we are in continual discussion with Skills Development Scotland and with our sector partners to try and move forward some of these ideas within the action plan and focus some of our activities around helping the sector to engage with the action plan. So whilst I think it's been a slow start over the past couple of years for the skills investment plan, ourselves and Skills Development Scotland are still very committed to seeing the actions and themes within it developed and delivered for the benefit of the sector as a whole. So hopefully that's given you a bit of insight into the skills investment plan. Hopefully you can see how conservation accreditation and certification is integral to some of the delivery of that investment plan. Excuse me, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have on that when we get to the Q&A session later on this morning. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Colin. That was great. And yeah, if you do have any questions for Colin, please just put them in the Q&A function down there at the bottom, and then we'll get to them at the Q&A section in just a little bit. So we are going to have just a quick break now, so if anyone needs to refresh their coffee, and then we're going to be coming back at 11 o'clock. Thanks, everyone. Hi everyone, welcome back. Alrighty, so we are going to move on to our next speaker, who is Liz Davidson. Liz Davidson is a senior project manager for the Mackintosh restoration at the Glasgow School of Art. She's going to speak about her experience with the importance of having a properly accredited team when working on historic building projects. Thanks, Liz.
My lecture will span the work that has been taking place over and since two fires at the A-listed building at Mackintosh at the Glasgow School of Art. The first in May 2014 and the second, far worse, fire during the restoration contract in 2018. So this is obviously a quite a bittersweet occasion for me as I'm talking against the backdrop of the now very unconserved Mackintosh. And up to the date of that second fire on June 18, 2016, I'd been very well versed in talking about the importance of the meticulous research, the conservation, and the innovation that had been part of that 3-year-long project. It was about a year to go, about 10 months out, and a fascinating journey up to that point. Not entirely smooth, not entirely without some unresolved areas of design and restoration that were being worked through as part of the process. A bit like the Harling mix we're using on the south elevation, and one of the topics where there was a lot of discussion. So it was a little bumpy, a lot of analysis, a bit of natural tension between the old and the new, and a result that eventually felt instinctively right, both to the touch and to the look. Oh, hold on, somebody is moving my, need my notes on the screen, and in its performance, which is how I feel about good conservation practice. As with everything, it's not black and white. And unfortunately, the phrase shades of grey has been kind of hijacked for generally more sensationalist purposes. But that's not to say that good conservation practice isn't in itself exhaustive, exciting, and sadly, in our case, it's certainly been racy, as with the emergency response in 2018, when the threat of collapse or total demolition was very real. I really love this south elevation, actually, of the building. It's the one that Mackintosh had a lot of criticism for at the time of its unveiling in the local press. Some of the more highfalutin editorials lambasted it for its couthiness, for want of a better description, but just how Mackintosh was this, adapting the very modern use of cement to cloak his Scots baronial fortress on the hill. This computer-generated image, and that's one of the areas where the school itself was adding its own expertise through the heritage visualization work under its SimViz department. This particular image, unfortunately, was made in the wake of the post-2018 fire to illustrate what we had lost across the building. So my lecture today will, of course, focus on the project The Mackintosh, one of the most important conservation projects in the UK and further afield, as it deals with the building in itself of international standing. And as the focus of my talk is the role of the value of the accredited project team, this slide illustrates the 3 or 4 strands of that core team. I started with the team at the school itself. And I think it's fair to recognise that Glasgow School of Art chose to appoint an internal restoration team drawn from accredited and experienced conservation professionals, which in itself is an extremely rare move for a client, at least one in higher education, as opposed to perhaps the National Trust or the museum sector. So this team internally was made up of myself, Sarah McKinnon and Tom Simmons. All have a conservation background, mine in postgrad in architectural conservation from Edinburgh Heriot-Watt University, and work through the Building Preservation Trust movement and regeneration at the City Council level. Sarah is a building surveyor and project manager with the National Museums of Scotland and also Preservation Trusts. We're both members of the IHBC. Sarah is now at the National Trust for Scotland and doing great things there. Tom came to us fresh from heading up the traditional skills courses at Glasgow City Heritage Trust, and we were fortunate enough to recruit to our archives department Polly Christie as a recovery project lead, who described herself as a Siberian, meaning that she had incredible skills in managing both cyberspace and library cataloguing through metadata, tagging and other whizzy stuff. All of this meant we were able to engage at a level of understanding and critical challenge with the external team, and of course with the huge respect for the expertise that they brought. So this slide illustrates in rather garish colours the design team we appointed after the 2014 fire. I'll return to this slide, but this is the brief that they responded to. and is worth looking at and dwelling. It gives you an accurate picture of the driving forces behind the restoration project after 2014. Surprisingly to me, in a way, it doesn't mention sustainability. That was very much part of the project. It wasn't in that headline of the brief, but it was certainly in the overall brief for the contract. But it'll be very different in the future project. That will be very much front and foremost, and quite rightly too. That team did grow quite quickly into a fuller team of other specialist consultants tackling some of the very specific issues of conservation that we face. So we had amazing people there, which I'll cover in a few of the slides as we go down, but just looking at it there and now, obviously Graciela Rainsworth, Ken Chappell, paint restoration through Sarah Gerish, paint analysis, Ian Crick-Smith, motors and renders. We had various companies, but certainly the Scottish Line Centre and Ros Artis Young, Rodney French looking at the lights, the Glasgow Marble through Jamie Fairhurst down south, Metalwork Will Murray at the Conservation Studio, AOC Object Conservation, Addyman and Kirkdale Archaeology both being involved in it, and stained glass through people like Sally Rush and Mark Bainbridge and Sue Bradbury, who I think have spoken previously at the conference. So an incredible raft of mainly Scottish-based, wonderful conservators, most of which I think will be part of the ICON setup accreditation. Going back to the main team, the project team, we specified in that original advert for the design team that it should, in fact, must be led by architectural team with advanced conservation accreditation, but also through the RICS and the surveying and the quantity surveying side, and through CARE, through the engineering professions. When we launched the tender for the architect, it was their responsibility to assemble the design team. We did through an OJ competition, and whilst we were between 40 to 50 submissions and a very healthy number from Scotland, some of my colleagues on the shortlisting panel were a bit disappointed they weren't getting entries from some of the bigger hitters across Europe, as we had on the Reed project opposite, designed by an American architect, Stephen Hall. And I think they quite rightly observed there was such a strong focus on the conservation credits of the brief, they would have scared off some of these bigger firms who perhaps didn't have that front and foremost. Perhaps they were right, but I wasn't overly worried on that score. We had excellent applicants, practices such as John McCaslin, Avanti, LDN, Purcell, and the eventual winner of the bid, Page Park. And this is David Page pretending that he's a shy retiring type in the hiding behind the little model of the library he brought along at the launch of the project. All the final shortlisted practices had strength in both conservation and in new design work. And you can see that through the regular design awards that all of those names get from RIS or RIBA or other agencies. And to my mind, at least all strong design practices should understand traditional buildings and construction, as well as the latest innovation and technological advances. In fact, the two go hand in hand, as we can see today, especially in the field of sustainable design, eco-materials, local supply chains, and the circular economy. These guys were two of the main heroes of the first project at the architectural level. Natalia Borowska and John Brown, a third member, Ian King, was also central to all their truly exhaustive and wonderfully detailed, informed and utterly focused work. Natalia was absolutely forensic in her research and understanding of the library construction, and in working our equally forensic structural engineers. So the detail of the library restoration was taken down literally to the direction of the wood grain of the floorboards, and how the direction of the saw cuts caught the light as it flooded in from the full height windows. Equally, DNA engineers at the same time were reverse engineering the construction of the library by sampling all the timber members, confirming the timber species, dimensions, the strengths, the performances, their flexibility. They'd been for many years concerned about the safety of the balcony under the load of the cabinets and the books, and had been generally closed off to public access, but their analysis proved how, in fact, it was totally capable of performing the function it had been designed for. And that is the space that was lost, sadly, in the 2014 fire. Moved rather quickly on from that, didn't I? Which I should dwell on it for a second longer, I think, because it was an incredibly beautiful space, but was coming back to us equally incredibly beautifully, thanks to the work of those people I've mentioned here. And this was a master craftsman that Page Park and DNA worked with, Angus Johnson at the cabinet makers, Lawrence McIntosh in Edinburgh, where the prototype there on the left was built prior to approval for the whole work. And it was a very moving occasion to come in, stand on underneath and just look at that wonderful piece of work and see just how incredible the feeling was of anybody who knew the library well, that you back in that space again. The commitment to the fine detail and the interpretation of details lost in the fire, but recreated in the stands of the skills craftspeople, guided by the research and understanding of the consultants, the designers, the architects and the engineers, was shown throughout the project. This is Studio 59 above the library and some of the exploded detail for that. The roof going into Studio 59 on a very lovely hot day when all the trades, the scaffolders, the masons, the lead workers, the carpenters, the crane operators, the roofers, all came together in a carefully choreographed day of putting the highest pitch back onto the Macintosh, whilst below in the flow slab of Studio 58 DNA, the engineers had developed a totally bespoke technique to retain the unreinforced concrete slab floor, which really had been made up of any old rubbish cast in between the steel filler joints, and to retain the flow, which was providing a great deal of lateral rigidity to the tower. They basically resin injected the flow that was there. Then they, underneath it, put in carbon fiber strips throughout the structure, and then load tested it in situ. And we proved that we could actually keep that structure there. And it was providing, it was really holding the top of the building together at that point. And just I want to switch a little bit between the consultants, between the conservators, between the crafts and the tradespeople, because they're equally important, and as touched upon by Colin in that earlier talk, just even looking at the way the work was being put back together again in Studio 58, the dukes were being made by, again, I would call a master craftsman, but a joiner, construction joiner, who brought out his duking axe and cut these lovely propeller-shaped dukes that would fit in and lock into the space between the brick. And he showed us how he'd done it, and just, it's not a kind of diamond cut, it's a reverse, I don't know the phrase even for what it was, but it was something that twisted the duke in, made it absolutely vertical, although with that strange cut in it, and it locked it in place. And it's such a quick process when you saw it done well. There's no such thing as a conservation accredited project manager or a CDM coordinator or a mechanical engineer, and perhaps there should be. Either way, we look very hard at all the CVs of these practices, also looking for extensive knowledge of that historic building. Mechanical and electrical engineering services in the first project were provided by Halley Haddo, and they had a long-standing relationship with the building. They really knew how it functioned. The specialist team they brought to bear were thoroughly versed in not only how to retrofit a building such as the Macintosh with state-of-the-art technology, but also how to ensure that it made sense to the raison d'etre of the building. Its huge 9-meter high painted studios were on the first floor were very difficult to heat in any time of the year, but particularly in winter. The utilitarian and deliberately plain ceilings, the floors and the walls with the trunking and the floor boxes were to be inserted in a practical but non-techno blingy manner. The natural ventilation of the building and how to insulate it without preventing it from breathing, all of that required a lot of thought and discussion with the architects, the lighting designer, Kevin Shaw, the fire detection and suppression engineers, the AV consultants, even lightning protection. We had one strip on the building, and to meet on paper demands, we'd have had to have 16, but they worked together to insert, in the end, I think it was 6, possibly 7 strips, all coordinated behind the new cast iron, new slightly oversized downpipes to account for climate change. So they were completely hidden, but much better protected in that building. And it was that care and level of attention that was just extraordinary to work with and amongst that team. We also needed to be sure that the project manager, often overlooked, I guess, for instance, could understand and advise on the procurement routes, the length of the programme. We did a 2-stage competitive tender for the first project, the way in which the sectional completions of each phase of the work could work, supply chains for the special trades and materials, and ultimately how long would be required for the delivery of the project on time and on budget, as it was in 2018 at that point. Same applied to the cost consultant, the quantities fair. Most professionals will tell you that the task of pulling together both a cost and a programme of a new building is much easier than that for a historic one. There are unknowns. You have to work around existing forms, irregular shapes, details, dependencies, all those awkward inherited accretions of the past. Nothing's been designed by a computer program and is neatly to the millimeter where you expect it or want it to be. So you have to factor in the buggeration quota as well. Nobody's going to teach you that in university. It has to be experienced on the job. And without that experience, putting unrealistic expectations on the program line and then seeing everyone, most importantly the contractor, fail repeatedly to achieve them is both demoralizing, ultimately expensive, and usually something suffers as a result in the quality of the project itself. Clerk of Works, I forgot to include him in that slide, so apologies for that. That was Sentinel, Bruce Malcolm. He was appointed on the basis of his unrivaled experience in historic buildings, a wonderful ability to really understand, but an even better ability to become almost invisible on the site and yet be omnipresent. He was actually on this section of the scaffold when the photo was taken, but just out of shot. I think it's, and this is us doing the very final bit of the building back in of the library piers in the 214 project. Personally, I think it's a much underrated profession, perhaps one that shows even a little dated, but the worth of a good clerk of works in a project such as the Mackintosh was inestimable. He became our ears, our eyes, sometimes our mouthpiece in liaising with the contractor and the sub-consultants to ensure good progress, smooth running. The quality of his recording and progress reports were constantly referred to during the works. So if a clerk of works were accredited on conservation grounds, Bruce would have passed with flying colours due to his understanding of the rules of traditional construction, meticulous researching of all the working drawings at each step of that project. The conservation engineer. I can see that Steve Wood of DNA is in fact following me on the agenda later on today. It's not too far-fetched to say that the engineer, DNA in our case, had been the bedrock of this project since 2014 to the present day, when the school was immediately plunged into the prospect of the very real and catastrophic structural failure and frankly chaos of 218 and the fire. The very heavy weight of responsibility fell almost overnight onto the shoulders of the incumbent consulting engineers. Dominic Echlin was there the very next morning, and in whom we could not have been in more experienced or capable hands. The plain fact of what happened that night in 218 is that we were almost immediately taken into a fight to save the building from either falling down in major sections or from being taken down by the city's building control department. It was very fraught, very difficult at the time. I'm shooting back again because it's important to think about the 214 project and how it's actually helped us, obviously, to the 218 project. So these are drawings that DNA produced in taking down those library piers after the first fire, because that's where that cauldron had really been based in 214. It was in the Southwest Library Tower. And there was a decision here, a lot of analysis, really fabulous work taken to look at these library piers, this kind of Jenga construction you can see in that bottom left of the slide. And this, I've taken a few screen grabs from DNA's own presentation on this, so it's slightly different. But each of the stones was made up of each of the pier levels rather, the lifts were made up of about 3 stones interlocking constantly up those piers. Terribly damaged in the fire, not as badly as this time, but pretty terribly damaged. And what DNA were able to do is to look at those 3 composite ways of how the piers were made up and try and find out just how much of that we could save. And a really interesting decision was taken not to repair it in situ or to grout it or stitch it or whatever in situ, but to dismantle the stone. That was so we could actually have the visual inspection on a block by block basis of that stone face to maximize the original stone that could be reused, to retain as much of it, as much as the model stone on the outside face, and to allow the masonry to be rebuilt in its original form as solid masonry and minimize the stitching and the resin crack repairs required to restore the integrity of the blocks and the masonry. So, you know, these really wonderfully, we wouldn't have known this unless it was dismantled. We actually couldn't have told how those piers were made up, but it showed us where the forces of the expansion of steelwork will have had most effect, where it would have cracked stone, where it would have been absorbed by the natural jointing of the stone, and where we had to replace stone on that site. And Sterling Stone were the engineers who more or less cradled every bit off the site on a gurney, kind of trundled it across one by one of these stones, took them off, repaired them, and brought them back. And they did just an incredible job actually in a very tight site where they literally had to thread stone through a very dense scaffold that was up against the building at that point. But the end result was this, that from a situation where it looked like we'd lose most of those piers, a lot of those piers were actually saved. So all the red were put back into the building. And on the outside face in particular, nearly all the stone is original, which is wonderful because the tooling that you can't see unless you're on a scaffold, there's a lot of the Mackintosh like that. I mean, he must have obviously forecast the either the fires and a lot of scaffold going up along this building or drones. Let's hope the latter. But the fine detail of the tooling and the masonry and the craftsmanship on that building at very high, inaccessible levels is a privilege to see, even in circumstances like this. I should shoot on. I'm going to keep a close eye on my time because we've got that very important minute of silence at noon. So yeah, they did an extraordinary job. And then to go back to that original restoration project, I have added in all those wonderful conservators and craftspeople that we worked with, because they're very much part of the team that were brought in, hand-selected, very much by the knowledge of the consultants themselves or ourselves at the school. But nobody, everyone was just a hero on the job itself, and brought in some extraordinary skills as we went through the building. So after the first fire, there was a lot of finds. There was archaeology undertaken by Kirkdale Archaeology, AOC Conservation, Harwell's down in Oxfordshire doing a lot of the document recovery once it was sent down. So a lot of it was frozen because of the water obviously in it, and then very gently brought back out of that to stop mold. And we salvaged a lot of paperwork from the library, which when you looked at the chaos of the library, it would have been hard to imagine at the time. And the work that was salvaged, the timber work from areas outside the library and along the corridors, very important for telling us about profiles and jointing structure, and obviously the timber itself and the materials that were being used. We have the wonderful Graciela Rainsworth and her team who worked through all the sculptures, some of which now were sadly lost again in the second fire, but doing all sorts of things, injecting and plaster casting and resin, grouting, and just amazing bespoke techniques to restore, some of them even more beautiful than before, if that is possible, the sculptures that were salvaged out of the work. Historic Environment Scotland were wonderful. They came on site. They've been wonderful throughout, to be honest, through their technical research departments, and used some of their analysis to look at the lights in this case, the ones from the library and elsewhere around the building. And we worked with the University of Glasgow and their material conservation departments also to look at the brass, as we found out most of the lights were, but we actually didn't know at the time. So again, being able to borrow in through that connection, particularly through the archive section, who have very close links to a broader conservation archive and icon related group of professionals, was really important to us. And then finding those people who have those trades still, thankfully, as is Rodney French and his extraordinary high-tech workshop, not in Edinburgh, in a basement in Edinburgh, individually restoring all the lights. So we had felt they were all lost in the fire. The archaeologists found the bits, nearly all the bits, to be honest. We sent them to Rodney, and he made us a light. And in fact, in the end, we've got 53 lights, which are all of them back in, and would have been hung, obviously, in the library itself, but for the fire. But they would have been good as, or better than before. And in fact, any of the new bits that he made, and there will have been some new bits in that he would have made to make up the components, were date stamped with his name and a date on it. Sarah Gerrish, who'd been involved in the painting restoration in areas like the library, so was able to give us a lot of her research, along with Ian Crick-Smith and the folk down at Leicester, who were able to do new paint samples, ironically with a lot of the paint having been burnt off in the fire itself, of course, of 214. So you could see some of the paint underneath the surfaces there. And he's not in the picture. Angus, again, who's the cabinet maker, is the person on the left, and Sarah, one of my ex-colleagues, now on the right there. But Ken Chappell, who's a wonderful watch clock mechanism restorer in the West End of Glasgow, was involved in the clocks, and they were out of the building quite quickly, thankfully, and we only lost one in that particular fire. I mentioned the trades, and Ian Crick-Smith there was obviously involved in the paint sampling. And to go to the trades, I mean, again, wonderful craftsmanship from people like the plasterers, who just were able to, put this beautiful muted, molded lime plaster back on ceilings, on walls, on details like these fireplaces in the building. And it's important because they understood that Mackintosh constantly modulated the light. It either came in through kind of rounded reveals to windows. You never had sharp edges. And in the plasterwork, constantly just softening out the irises on the structures in the building. So it was constantly being modelled and manipulated and shaped and softened through the building, because the light was just so very, very important. And some of the lovely joinery that was the construction joinery being put back in. So this is not special high-end cabinet joinery. Nevertheless, as with the Dukes, we had just wonderful joiners, JCG from Dunfermline in this case, who are doing a lot of the construction joinery throughout the building. Sadly, a lot of what I've just shown you there obviously was lost. Glass as well, though, dealing with Lamberts, who are based in Germany, on some of the new hand-blown glass that was put back in, and the Harling. And I think it's Castle were the name of the Harlers who did the work here, but working very closely with Ros Artis Young at the Lime Centre to get the right texture, the right aggregate, again, sand from Arran being brought in, to get the right feel on those rear elevations, which is, as I say, one of my favourite. 218, the fire there really destroyed most of what I've just shown you, so I'm sorry about that. And there's not much I can do about it now. But to go back to DNA, where we were lucky is that we were able to bring in overnight DNA, who knew how that building performed. They knew how it breathed and how it worked, and that was incredibly important. So there's a rightful focus here on the work of the engineers in this second phase, I think, in the project. That red line sadly tells you everything that had to either was lost in the second fire or had to be taken down very quickly because it was at danger of collapse. So very, I think Dominic from DNA described it as battlefield surgery. It was quite savage, but essential that we took off the bits that had lost restraint and were in danger of causing public danger, obviously, or bringing down more of the building. The library piers, once rebuilt, on the right hand of that slide, really shattered this time. So I think a lot of that will have to come down, but at least we knew what we were dealing with there. And Tom in the centre of that slide, my colleague Tom Simmons, and our admin post, Hannah on the left, looking at some again of these details that you barely know were there, but we had numbered, working with Page and Park and DNA to number the important stones. So brickwork underneath the Harl, that actually survived all right. The brick did survive okay for being baked twice in its life. But the stonework, the moulded features, we were anxious to lift off. So working with Rygut contractors on this, we were able to go in quite early, thankfully, and dismantle and take down some of those pieces and lift them off, take them off to storage as best as we could at the front end, while we did have, the threat of demolition being chasing us on an almost daily basis. So they were doing, some really on the spot work here by just strapping off some of the stones, lifting them down. And eventually what we're moving to on the site at the moment, and nearly at that point, is clearing out all of the debris that's in the building. So it's giving us the clean structure to look at just what's left and what's damaged and what's surviving, as you see on that right-hand slide. Brickwork okay, steelwork horribly buckled, fried masonry. But we will get specialist input on that. Dominic, I know, and DNA overall work very closely with our SimVis school. So these scans, these laser point cloud survey work, again, an area where, it's going to be part of conservation more and more and more anyway, but it was particularly useful in disaster situations like this. We were able, again, I had to do it in 2014, but at a much more advanced level this time, to within a week, within that first week, scan, this probably was taken about 2 days after the 218 fire, rescan that entire building and demonstrate to building control in particular and to our own engineers if it had moved, where it had moved, if it was in danger of collapse. And we were able to say it's not, but if we do this, we can certainly hold it, and then we can go back in and start stitching it and consolidating back together. But it was very important to have that. And I know DNA worked at a speed that would have taken normally months, and they probably did it all in about 4 or 5 days because the urgency was thus to do that. So again, massively indebted to our own department here of School of SimVis in the art school for doing this work, and being able to correspond it to the more, I suppose, traditional. This is us working with Page and Park and then marking up a drawing to say, these are the really important bits. You must get these off. Don't let these be pushed in, demolished, damaged. Protect them, either cover them or take them off or whatever, but these are the bits you have to keep. And then drone survey work, working with a filmmaker and a drone survey operative to go over the site within 24 hours, so we could just see what the damage was, and it was as bad as we had feared, which is that everything had dropped down to basically basement level. So all organic material had been destroyed in the fire. Everything that could burn had burnt. But on that, to be able to mark from our knowledge of the building, and here actually using the Clerk of Works photographs quite a lot as well, just where we knew there were still bits that were being worked on in the building that we could find, and to bring in our case this time, Addyman Archaeology through Simpson and Brown, to look at those zones of the building and to periodically go in, say stop, and the archaeologists go in first alongside the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, who are still there. And that's the kind of debris that they has now been cleared, but it is painstaking hand barrowing work to make sure that we're not missing anything. And just to cut through, you can't put a spade into that. You've got to cut out metal, you've got to saw through things and then lift some things out with a crane because they're too big, and then you barrow other stuff out. So it's horrible work, but the archaeologists are finding things. So this is the concave screen base outside at basement corridor level on the west, the lecture theatre, and the footing of that screen you see on the left hand slide from 1909, found in the ground. And it's actually told us something already we didn't know about where the flow level was originally and how the sequence in which it had been built. So it will be important. So that's been covered over since. And this is kind of where this is slides just taken in the last day or so. So again, there's much left, but what we have left we're very precious about. So these are the lovely niches on the left-hand side, formed out of lath and cement render that was brought inside the building, in this case for decorative effect. There's not much decoration in terms of a lot of the building, but where it is used, it's very beautifully, subtly used. Excuse me. And we can see obviously how that's made, and ironically this is the studio that in 214 was the studio that actually started the first fire. And then I thought I'd put in an east and west staircase, but I can see from the addition of the handrail, this is only the west staircase I'm showing you, but those sculptural forms have survived, and as I say, the brick has survived, and some of the Glasgow marble on those surfaces has survived if bossed, and we will be able to repair those and the metalwork together with concrete floor structures and reapplication of plaster. So some of the bigger structural elements are thankfully there still. I want to go off on a tangent for the last 5-10 minutes. Makes it interesting for me as well. Well, it's all interesting, but I'd like to conclude by taking a few minutes to discuss what that very special value of the conservation accredited team bring to a project such as the Mackintosh, but more generally to not just conservation, but to good architecture and to good design. And that, in my opinion, is how they read and interpret a building, the context it occupies and the layers of meaning it encompasses. That role of an interpreter is critical in what a skilled professional brings. It's that deep, deep understanding of the soul of the text, of the author of that text, and for that matter, of the reader. I'm struck with the definitions of some of the language we use in conservation, how important it is we choose the right one, which is down in turn to the extraordinary understanding and experience of those people we've had the privilege to work with. I don't know how many of you watched the National Theatre of Scotland's production of Adam. It's worth watching. It's on iPlayer. It's set in Glasgow, some of it. It's about a transgender Egyptian man who found refuge here. Stay with me. Anyway, at the beginning of it, his observations on the use of language are fascinating. There's a passage where he talks about contronyms, I think they're called. That's words that are spelt the same but the opposite meaning. So, for example, the word he uses the word transparent, that is about something that's see-through and invisible, but also it's obvious. Or he talks about he was in the process himself of the context of, I guess, he was looking for refuge in the country and for security of a new home, but he was also fleeing security forces of his birth country, which had no tolerance for his circumstance. And it struck me as to how important perspective and experience and empathy was in dealing with historic buildings. This finite resource and how important the exercise of the correct interpretation is. And this is what we tried to create in assembling the right team for the Mackintosh. Professionals with experience, expertise, empathy, and the ability to interpret correctly the situation they're presented with after careful assessment, analysis, research, and consultation. And after this, to understand and heal the soul of the building, I think, and to maintain the integrity of that structure and the design throughout. So, for instance, render, I mentioned it at the very start. This was originally a cement-rich mix with sand aggregate, just checking my time, from Aaron. We discussed it long and hard about what it should be repaired with. And of course, lime was first considered. In fact, there was a suggestion we take everything off after the first fire and re-render it in lime. But this was considered, it wasn't right for the building. I certainly wasn't certain. And we had a really interesting discussion, but we had a landlocked site, very difficult to access. We oversailed another 2 buildings. So there's issues of permission. It was an exposed elevation, which really took both the battering from the weather and the full heat of the southern sun. We had to accept that the cement render had been there for over a century without major failure or damp inside. So to settle the discussion, we brought in the Scottish Lime Centre, run by the RIS Conservation credited Ros Artis Young, who in turn sampled, tested and suggested a replacement mix with an additive of lime and a moderately hard set to work with the remaining non-boss cement jacket, plus a binding wash of lime wash to unify the overall appearance. This was not only more cost effective, and that genuinely wasn't the issue, but it was the sensible thing to do, and the results we were achieving on the site were really impressive. Let's render. Cast, well, I mentioned the casts, and again, we worked with Graciela here. It was fabulous. There was discussion about the ones that were damaged. Did we just get rid of them? But actually, what happened was they became even more beautiful after the fire. Some of them, and some of them, interestingly, were kind of burnished black and more dramatic after the fire. It was a wonderful moment, is what was achieved because of the utterly painstaking work of the sculpture conservation on this. And they were going to come back in. Some of them are actually up in the Reed at the moment, and they are extraordinary testimonies, these figures, to what's happened to them, I think. Dust, we've a lot of dust, a lot of dust now. But you can use the word dust and to actually add almost a patina to something. You can dust icing sugar over cake or something like that. But in our case, we've had to work with specialists to decontaminate, to take it off. Again, Graciela was very involved in that, but others as well, AOC, the object conservators, who painstakingly took things from the first fire and cleaned them in such a way that they were stabilized and they didn't deteriorate any further. And also just moving forward to things like the technology aspect of things, that the Laocoon here, the statue that was burnt horribly in the first fire, would have, at first, if we didn't have that expertise, would have just crumbled over time. But he was consolidated. He was then burnished and made beautiful. He was sadly lost in the second fire, but we have, through the SimVis department and through ISO, a company in Glasgow working with us, managed to laser point cloud his being, and he now survives in digital form in a really interesting way, because we can set him back into the studio, back into the text when you put on one of those augmented reality headsets, and he can fire up information to you about the process or about the school or about Laocoon and who he was in I was going to say Greek mythology, but I think Mesopotamia is where he first occurs. Again, back to the engineers, I guess, to buckle something usually makes it fast. These beams are actually still doing a job, and what DNA do at the moment, and will work with people like Stangers and others to test, is just what job they're doing, and can we retain any of these, or are they all going to come out and we'll put new steel beams in? But they did a job at the time. You can see where they had given way and did literally buckle. But again, it's that ability of the engineer to understand how the building has performed and to interpret just what has happened within the building as a result of that is going to be crucial to us going forward. And yeah, we've certainly been held up by our architects and by IMBRU, obviously, and all the workforce. But it's allowed us, through that physical holding up of the building, to delay much worse things clearly happening through either statutory rules or just the natural deterioration that would have happened after this. So we've stopped bad things happening since as well, I think, while supporting it. So there's been a whole mix of things, not just scaffolding, not just bracing and propping, but the mix of restraint measures on this building and propping measures are probably a case story in themselves, which is not for today. And yeah, to whether it's been horribly eroded, but we also think, again, because of our professionals, we are going to weather this terrible series of storms that the school has had, really because of the work of these people. So to conclude this monologue, what I'd like to say firstly is thank you to all those consultants and professionals that have worked so hard to be so very good at what they do and who strive to continually better their understanding and respond to the new learning and the new advances. Thank you all to the trades and to the craftspeople. To be a good conservation professional, you first have to be a good practitioner in the present day, abiding by modern day standards, rules, risk management, etc. And then you have to go further to understand and appreciate the qualities of something built perhaps centuries earlier. It demands that you become a rounded professional with a truly deep understanding of your subject, one that allows you to interpret and make intuitive, brilliant decisions about what you're faced with. And that takes effort, empathy, and great enthusiasm, but for an equally great reward. So thank you very much.
That's great. Thanks so much, Liz. So we're going to now move on to our Q&A session with Liz and Colin. So as I said before, if you just want to put any questions you have down in that Q&A box there. Well, I know it takes a little bit of a second to start typing. So we did have a question. I saw that you answered that already, Colin, but I wondered people might actually be interested in the answer as well. So we had a question about the skills investment plan providing any funding, such as payment of or a contribution towards accreditation application fees. So I wondered if you wanted to just say your answer there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think unfortunately the answer is no at the minute. One of the things that we're discussing with Skills Development Scotland is how we get some, what I've described there as non-pathway allocated funding to enable us to move on with some of the actions that are in the skills investment plan. A lot of SDS's funding is tied up with pathways like modern apprenticeships, graduate apprenticeships. So that's something that I really want to explore them in the next year, is how we get some free money effectively so that we can start to offer support for projects, initiatives, like getting more people through accreditation. So that's something I'll take away and feedback at some point on.
And it's definitely, I think, coming off of yesterday as well, there definitely seems to be, in terms of, especially if we're looking for things like surveyors and architects, the undergraduate education that is currently being given does not really highlight conservation as much. And in fact, some of the architects yesterday were saying that it wasn't really ever mentioned in their coursework. So I think I guess it's not really a question, but there's definitely areas there of basically introducing people and getting them to realize that this is a career option. And I think it was actually very encouraging to hear you say, Colin, because obviously we always hear, especially recently, about the job market for young people being fairly dire. But it is encouraging to hear you say that actually we've got to fight for the young workforce, and we've got to fight to bring them into conservation and get them invested in this as a career opportunity.
I think I really, there was a phrase, I went to a talk by RICS a few years ago, and it was a phrase that they coined this: we're in a war for talent. And I think we all work in this sector because we're interested and we're passionate and we are very committed to it. And sometimes that almost, it blinds us to the fact that we still need to sell it. We still need to be advocates for it. And as there's more competition for young people and different opportunities for them for careers, we need to make sure that what we're interested in is front and center. And I think that is that's going to be really important going forward. I think just on your point about sort of mainstreaming, I think the publication of the infrastructure investment plan and some of the stuff that's in there about you need to do something with the old thing before you get permission to build the new thing. Mm-hmm. That and the whole focus on net zero going forward, that will start to have an impact on how people are trained and how people are, what content is in undergraduate courses, because it will become much more of a core purpose of everybody's job to make sure they're equipped to address those issues going forward.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, obviously, as you say, I think that is a very important point that I think a lot of people here today really do obviously understand the importance of conservation, have really, worked very hard. But it's getting that extra step and bringing in as many people as we can. I should mention that obviously we've tried to include as many accreditation bodies as we can in this conference, but with our already packed schedule, unfortunately, we weren't able to include everybody. And so there is also, if people are interested, there is also the Chartered Institute of Building, and they run a conservation accreditation scheme as well, which might be of interest to quite a few people attending. Yeah, Liz, I see you nodding. Yeah, so that's something to also to think about. And it's something, as I say, unfortunately, we just weren't able to fit it into this conference, but we are hoping to be able to run a GCHT-based CPD event later on this year, hopefully in the summer sometime. So if you are interested in that, then just please keep an eye out on our website for future events. Let's see here. Unfortunately, it looks like you guys aren't going to get any tricky questions. maybe that's something that you'll be excited by. Let's see. I do have a question from one of my colleagues. She has just asked, as someone who provides skills training in CPDs, are there any specific ways you can recommend to engage the future workforce with conservation as a career choice? So yeah, I think a lot of what, especially what you were saying, Liz, I think this is such a good case study for demonstrating to people what it is that it takes to work on these projects. And so maybe, do you guys think case studies, obviously there is definitely an element of we need to be able to bring people in. And of course, there's this element of people do need to be able to work for a living. So would you say maybe it's a funding issue or an interest level issue, maybe both?
Oh, I'm actually very confused that it isn't more prevalent in a sense, but then that's because that's the world, I occupy. It becomes quite a small world, but it's constantly breaching out into bigger areas. All those people that we've worked with will be working on brand new campus buildings or whatever. There's nobody there who's probably not involved in new building as well. And Colin will have the statistics, but I think you probably showed it in the first part of your presentation, Colin, the amount of existing historic building or traditional building stock we have in the country. Not only is the work there for sure, for contractors to, or for industry generally to, apply themselves towards and to upskill and bring people in as specialists, because I would look for a company that had at least a part of its workforce. It might even just be one person, but somebody who has that specialism in it. But also it's as an economic generator, it creates so much more local wealth, both in the investment in that person. Usually the rates of pay are going to be higher because you're a better skilled person at whatever you're doing. And you're usually using more of a local supply chain. And when I say local, it might not be, might just be, could be Britain, but that in itself is local in terms of construction still. So I think it's just something we still need to catch up on, because there's no doubt that both the work and the investment is there.
Mm-hmm. I think the big issue is how we change need into demand. I think Liz said it there. We all know there's a need for the skills and the expertise and the knowledge, but how do you make that into demand? And I think accreditation and proof of competency, at all levels, but at a traditional skills level as well. These are ways that we can enable people to differentiate themselves and prove that they're worth that extra rate, that extra, chance to get on a tender list or whatever. I think these things all have to be developed concurrently. It truly is a chicken and egg situation. How do you identify the level of skill within the supply chain if there's not a methodology for identifying that level of skill? There are things that we have to do concurrently to improve the situation, and I think accreditation at a professional level is one of those things. We are still working on the Heritage Skills VQ suite at a craft level to try and get that rolled out across Scotland. I think there's a these things are on a cycle really, and I think there's a growing realization again of the importance of knowledge and skills and the need for things to be done right the first time. And we need to find good ways of people being able to identify who those individuals that can do that are. And then we need to look at the procurement process to make sure that the procurement process allows us to do those things. And I think it will then create the added benefit that Liz mentioned there of increasing local supply chains and keeping more money in local economies and things like that. But it's not, unfortunately, there's not a one single shot solution here. It's a very multifaceted thing. Just on the point of the how to engage with the future workforce, the work that the traditional building forums do, that a lot of the city heritage trusts are involved in, a lot of the heritage bodies are involved in, linking up with wider initiatives like developing the young workforce, which is obviously something that's run by Scottish Government to try and engage people in the world of work so they understand what work is like and what jobs are out there for them. I totally get that these are hard work sometimes, and they're, there's not an immediate gratification of seeing a solution being presented, but I think the amount of time that the sector invests in things like those will start to pay dividends over the longer term. And I would just encourage everybody to support that type of work as much as they can. If young people can't see it, they don't know it's there. Yeah. And I think that's the key thing, being able to get young people onto a site or get their hands on, a laser scanner or, a Merlin chisel, that's what opens their eyes to what the opportunities are out there are. Most people's careers advice, comes from their family, friends. Yeah. So if your family and friends don't know about building conservation or the wider built environment sector, then you're not going to be aware of it either. So I think we need to invest the time and effort in that type of outreach work.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And I should also add, Taylor, the one thing that did happen on the project through Tom Simmons' role really was we put very positive clauses in the contract with all the subcontractors. This is at contractor level, but we were very keen to bring apprentices on. So there were apprentices in stone, in plaster, I think in lead, and they were mainly women. We put kind of positive discrimination clauses in because we wanted to see more women. I mean, that agenda in itself is one that, building and it's interesting at the moment. A lot of our consultants are female. They're working that part up the chain, which it can only be a good thing. And we haven't even touched on the whole equality and diversity side of things. And it's still a very white male, and this isn't a criticism, it's just a thing of observation of fact, but we're missing a lot of tricks, I think, with some of the, particularly at the skills level, I think, of people who've come into the country who are coming from often countries with a lot of their own still live use of craft and skills, and that isn't really showing enough, I think, in the sector yet, but I'm sure it will start to come through, hopefully a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, the idea of events like this is to provide, as Colin, as you said earlier, is to help provide that sort of more joined up thinking and to kind of recognize that there's a lot of avenues of where people need skill sets or, jobs are needed and things like this, and just basically making sure that everything is getting that connection and it is being brought together, because as you say, there's a lot of things happening sort of without that connection, and there's a lot of skills that could potentially be used, and there's a lot of buildings that need those skills, and so yeah, I think hopefully events like this do help with that, with helping to join people up and helping to make people realize what other, we have quite a few accreditation bodies out there, and sort of what their accreditation scheme is, but also understanding that you don't necessarily only have to belong to one body. There are other ones that you can belong to, and that there, and helping, and it just helps create those connections and that discussion within the sector, with everybody working on the built historic environment. So I think we've just got one more question that is actually, this is directly to you, Liz, but Jocelyn Cunliffe was just wondering, when will the new proposals for the art school site be coming forward? And has the whole design team been replaced?
Right, shall I do it in order? No, I'll do it in order. So what the school are doing at the moment is there's maybe a couple of strands to it. We're still on site until July, clearing out the building. So we're working alongside the fire service, and that concludes at the end of July. And then that will be the building completely cleared of debris. And as per one of those sites, it'll be a clean structure basically, but still held up with all the scaffolding. So the next proposals are very much not even about what happens next to the building. The next proposals are to stabilize what we have and to move on over the next year at least, I think, in getting rid of all that scaffold, because it has a huge, it's a huge impediment locally, particularly to the long-suffering community up here in Garnet Hill. So that's the next immediate phase, which is probably over the next 12, 18 months anyways, to start stitching the building back with what we've got in the building. The bigger proposals about what happens, the school's just finished, and I think it goes to our board in a matter of weeks, I think at some point next month, an outline business case or a strategic case, which has involved quite a lot of consultation with a huge range of people, including Historic Scotland and amenity groups. I know City Heritage Trust were involved as well. Local people, experts, whichever, and there seems to be I mean, I'm talking in advance of its publication, so I can't really say anything, but I would say that clearly what's come through the consultation process and everything we've looked at is that there's still a huge I think love isn't too bad a word, too strong a word, for the building and what it means, and for the building to, because the question was asked, do you even want to have a place of education on this site? It was starting from first principles. So there's a huge love for the building, for what it represents, for Mackintosh design as well. I think there's probably a spectrum of options that can go forward, but we've probably established certainly that it will be reconstructed, rebuilt. The fine tuning and the detail of that, you're quite right, would then fall to the design team, which has not been appointed yet. That will be a full ODU procurement. It'll be value-wise a massive project to do what we're going to be doing next, 3 or 4 times larger than the last project. So that will be a very carefully scripted and exciting brief. I talked at the start about sustainability. I think that has to be key to what we're doing. I mean, there's gone are the days of arguing at the end, well, we've put a solar panel up there and that's our credentials on that. It's got to be root and branch, thinking about the carbon, zero carbon, or certainly the entire circular economy and what we have embodied wise on the site, but what we're bringing to the site and what we want the building, how we want it to perform. So it's going to be an extraordinarily exciting conservation project, but with a massive amount of new technology into the building to prepare it for something that probably we will not be able to walk through the doors of until later in the decade from where we are now. So the existing design team have a role to continue with as they stand, and they will be certainly very well placed to look to the future, I think. But that procurement of the new design team will be likely not happening for another, it takes ages, probably another 18 months, something like that. So that's in train, but about to get started on that next phase of talking positively about what we want on the site after a fairly traumatic time, I think it's fair to say, for the school itself, and coming out of just the horror of what happened across the road. I'm sitting in the Reed, so across the road.
Alrighty, well, I think that is all the questions that we have now. I think what we're going to do is move into, there is that national moment of silence that is coming up in just a minute here. So I think we're going to go into our break just a minute or two early, and then we're going to be coming back at 12:10, and we're going to be hearing from Susan Bradshaw of ICON and Steve Wood, who is part of the Conservation Accreditation Register for Engineers. So we'll see you in just a few minutes. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Hi everyone, welcome back. So the last little bit of the morning, we are going to hear from two different accreditation bodies about their accreditation schemes and hopefully get you excited to attend either of their workshops this afternoon. We'll be holding those workshops at 2 o'clock. So we're going to be hearing from ICON and the Conservation Accreditation Register for Engineers. You should have received an email around 11 o'clock with registration links for those two workshops. So just click on that and choose which one you'd like to register for. If you didn't receive that email, do just check your junk. These things have a tendency to end up there sometimes. But also I'm going to be putting the registration links. Yes, they're in the chat there. So the registration links for signing up for those workshops are there in the chat as well. Alrighty, so moving on, we are going to hear first from Susan Bradshaw, who is the head of professional development at ICON. So I'm going to move on to Susan.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm pleased to be part of this particular conference, and it's great to be able to share with you some of our information around the Institute of Conservation and the introduction to ICON accreditation. I've been involved with the ICON accreditation since it was developed back in 1999. So hopefully I can give you quite a good insight to what we've experienced. But just to let you know, I'm going to be giving you an overview of who we are, how ICON accreditation meets ICON's strategic objectives, and an introduction to the accreditation framework. So who are we? Sorry, press the button too quick. Who are we? ICON actually raises awareness of cultural, social and economic values of caring for heritage and champions high standards of conservation. We are a professional body raising the standards of conservation practice. ICON is an independent charity and membership organisation representing around 2,500 members. That's individuals, organisations, and include professional conservators, volunteers, and owners of cultural heritage. So what I just want to go through is our three key strategic objectives with regard accreditation and basically what we do. So basically, in terms of advocacy, we continue to develop policy and collaborate with stakeholders. In excellence, obviously this covers quite a lot of our professional development activities, including accreditation, professional standards, training and CPD, and engagement, which is very much around our professional journal publications, ICON News. We also have an external newsletter, but also events and talking to the public so that we are meeting our charitable objectives. So in relation to advocacy, there's ongoing development continues to promote ICON accreditation through sessions like this one, as well as through campaigns such as the one featuring here, the Conservators You Can Trust. We're advertising it at the moment in quite a number of magazines, so maybe you might have seen the adverts. But this leaflet actually highlights the way to find reliable professional conservators through our conservation register. And the new logo here on the bottom right hand side actually is an indication of ICON accredited member. So, you know, that is the designate to look out for when sourcing an accredited member of ICON. Because accreditation is about the individual, it's not about the organisation or the business that they actually run in. One of our impact stories that I'd just like to highlight is the one that's featured here called AIM Collection Care Audit Grant Scheme. It was run by the Association of Independent Museums in association with ICON and was generously funded by the Pilgrim Trust. In fact, it's still going on. This grant actually enables small museums to undertake a basic but professional collections care audit. as audits are intended to help museum staff identify collection care issues and priorities, and are undertaken solely by ICON accredited conservators. In relation to excellence, ICON's professional standards, as highlighted here, provide the excellence benchmark. And last month, we actually introduced a new facility on our website for ICON members to actually log and review their professional and personal development. As you can see on the right-hand side, this is my account, keeping their CPD records in one place. It will support accredited conservators to prepare for their CPD reviews, but also for our pathway members, their annual check towards accreditation. And I'll go into that a little bit more detail quite soon. In relation to engagement, one of the projects we created to promote the 20th anniversary of accreditation, because we've reached this amazing milestone so quickly, as far as I can think. But the virtual open studios actually features quite a lot of conservation work that's being carried out in all sorts of different specialisms around and it's basically for accredited members. So please do go and have a look at that. I'm sure you'll be impressed to see the type of work that they're carrying out. Also, to highlight the fact that the Conservation Register lists all our accredited members, and therefore that is where you want to go if you want to source them. You can find their details by typing in their name, specialist area, or your postcode. And to support ICON members who are not yet accredited, we have set up a dedicated membership category. This is the Pathway membership. That provides them with a mentor and access to an annual conference designed solely to support their professional development. Of course, we're actively interested in making ICON accreditation open to a broader range of conservators. In these challenging times, it's important that there is heft in our approach when lobbying and being heard by government. Also to highlight the fact that ICON members are not just solely based in the UK, and red marks the locations of the sort of top 10 areas. But part of our ICON's strategy includes increasing our international profile. And at the moment, we're currently trialling an online assessment process for ICON accreditation. So members based inside or outside of the UK can take full advantage of this new development, which came about through COVID restrictions. And obviously people can't visit in the workplace. So we've been doing these online assessments to enable that process to continue. And just to highlight the fact that ICON has a Scotland group, and they do offer a grant of 50% of the fees to help members apply for accreditation. So what do our members do? These are the sort of the main specialist areas that we feature as part of our membership. And some of them obviously noted as what was in Liz's session earlier this morning. What we do, we're always keen to expand this list as much as possible, because obviously there are some areas that are featured quite strongly, like care of collections and book and paper. Equally, there are the gilding and decorative services, and the horology obviously wasn't mentioned, it's not in this list, but we do have accredited members who specialise in horology. So becoming an ACR, accredited conservator restorer. This is to define exactly what accredited members are. They demonstrate to clients, employers and peers that an individual has an in-depth knowledge of conservation, a high degree of competence, sound judgment and deep understanding of the principles which underpin their practice, by showing that they are proficient across ICON's professional standards in conservation. An accredited member is required to maintain their professional development on an ongoing basis. So it's not just sort of a one-off thing. It is not like a qualification. It is a continuous. So once they are accredited, they need to maintain their professional practice, and all our ACRs can be found on the Conservation Register. So what are ICON's professional standards? ICON's professional standards and judgment and ethics are a guide to the professional practice of conservators. Initially developed in 1999, the ICON, oh, I don't know why it keeps doing that. The ICON professional standards and judgments and ethics are regularly reviewed over 5 years to ensure that they're fit for practice. They provide the foundation of many of ICON's work, including the code of conduct that all ICON members sign up to. The ICON ethical guidance is designed to guide the actions of all ICON members, regardless of specialism or area of practice, and the glossary of terminology is used throughout ICON's documentation. So for the professional standards themselves, we have 5 professional standards, as well as the professional judgment and ethics, which actually are reflected throughout all of those standards. And each of those standards is broken down into individual criteria, which makes up the overall standard. In order to understand how those standards are applied in relation to accreditation, I just want to talk through the novice to expert scale, which is based around the Dreyfus model. And this is a way that we can indicate the career path of a conservator. So for example, just starting out in relation to knowledge, standard, autonomy, complexity, these are the sort of, this is the level that we're expecting somebody to start at. And just to highlight that for our ICON student members, we have now included a new benefit of student mentoring program. So obviously that's a real key thing for graduating students to be part of. In terms of qualified beginner, basically this is somebody who's completed their qualification or they're learning in the workplace. And we in England just want to highlight that the Trailblazer apprenticeships have now been set up for conservation technicians and conservator. The practicing is the competent level, which is the one when you've qualified and you're just starting to learn. And this is where we would call that as the pathway member. And finally, the experienced proficient level. This is the level that is required to achieve accreditation and can be reasonably attained after 5 years of regular work experience, post initial qualification or work-based training. So just to give you an overview of the accreditation framework, ICON accreditation is awarded by the Institute of Conservation and is aligned to the ICON's professional standards. So as I said, it's been running for over 20 years now. We have accredited around 1,100 people through the process itself. And currently we have 762 on our database. That's obviously to take into account for natural attrition and new ACRs coming on board. Of those 762, 148 of them actually practice in the built heritage environment, such as building interiors, architectural sculpture and stone, wrought iron, metal, engineering and ancient monuments. There are no barriers to applying for ICON accreditation, as it's about a snapshot in time on how they meet the professional standards through their conservation work, regardless of specialism or entry route into conservation. And the accreditation framework is listed there as in the professional practice assessment, the continuing professional development, which is a way of ensuring a maintenance and enhancement of professional capability. And then the disciplinary procedure is a way of removing an ACR who fails to maintain a minimum standard of practice and ethics demonstrated through regular CPD reviews. The accreditation process itself, outlined here, is based on a thorough peer assessment process. Candidates must first submit an application for accreditation, which is reviewed by a panel of appointed accredited members who advise on whether an individual is ready to proceed. Following that, candidates must undertake a professional practice assessment with 2 appointed assessors in the workplace or online. Prospective applicants for ICON accreditation must be signed up to the Pathway membership category in order to apply. And if you've signed up for the workshop this afternoon, you will learn more about this process from the 2 accredited conservators and my colleague Patrick Wife, and also find out about a career in conservation. So thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please do ask Patrick this afternoon, but do get in touch if you've got any professional specific queries, or visit our website to find out more. Thank you. Back to you, Taylor.
Thanks so much, Susan. That was great. And as Susan said, yeah, if you're interested in finding out more, you can attend the workshop this afternoon. That'll be starting at 2 o'clock. And as I said, you should have received a link in an email this morning. Check your junk mail if you haven't. And if you can't find the link, no problem. It is in the chat there. So you can just go ahead and register yourself for that workshop. So now we're going to move on to the Conservation Accreditation Register for Engineers, which we're going to hear from Steve Wood, who is part of David Narrow Associates and an engineer, as well as part of the register. And he's going to tell us a little bit more about the register and what you can be hearing about this afternoon if you want to go to that workshop. Thanks. Take it away, Steve.
Thank you. I'm going to be talking quite briefly this morning because I think the bulk of what people need to hear is in the workshop this afternoon. What I will do is obviously give you a brief overview now of what the CARE scheme is and so on and so forth. The second slide there, and this is my last slide, is my plan for this afternoon. If anyone wants to join me, I have included a particular case study in it because I think that case study captures exactly what the essence of being a conservation accredited engineer is. It's a bit of a subtle case study that you either get or you don't, and if you don't get it, the conservation accreditation is not for you. Anyway, I'll give you now an overview of what the CARE scheme is and who it's open to, and the benefits of it. Now, CARE, it is an acronym, stands for the Conservation Accreditation Register for Engineers. It was set up in 2003 to identify engineers skilled in the conservation of historical structures and sites, be they buildings, bridges, harbours, riverbanks, canals, industrial sites, and even natural landscapes. It is administered by the Institution of Civil Engineers and the Institution of Structural Engineers. There are, I think there's a shade under 80 accredited engineers at the current time. Now, why do we need CARE? Primarily, it is to raise the standard of conservation engineering across the industry. And it is also to encourage education and training in conservation engineering. It's to promote sympathetic and best practice conservation, and is to assist organisations in selecting an appropriate engineer with proven conservation experience. Now, having become accredited, you have proved your conservation experience and skills. And in doing so, you have been independently assessed by 2 leading professional engineering institutions. The actual assessment process is led by engineers, but there is also input from an alternative discipline, be it a chartered building surveyor or a chartered architect, a conservation accredited architect or a conservation accredited building surveyor. Obviously, you will be able to promote sympathetic conservation, care and retention of the historic built environment, and you will have up-to-date expertise and knowledge and the use of the most effective practices. You will also show that you are committed to continual learning and improvement of conservation matters. Now, the register is intended to provide confidence to clients, statutory authorities, and I think most important thing, other professional organisations and the public that the specific activity undertaken by the registrant, the care accredited engineer, will reflect current best practice. Obviously, it's also of benefit to the owners or custodians of historic assets, those who protect our heritage when considering listed building applications and when works to listed buildings are desirable or necessary, including local authority officers. Accreditation can, or might say should, be used as a minimum requirement for procuring consultancy services when dealing with historical buildings. Now, who is eligible? Basically, a chartered engineer or an incorporated engineer through the Institution of Civil and Structural Engineers and Engineers Ireland. When making your application, when being assessed, there are 5 areas that you are tested on. And that's cultural significance, aesthetic qualities and value of the thing, the investigation and materials and technology you've considered as part of the thing, social and financial issues, and the actual implementation and management of the works that you have specified. And you demonstrate those attributes through 5 case studies of your work, within most of which, 3 of which have got to be within the past 5 years. Now, the key point, a few key points behind all this, and I'm almost drawing to a close here, is that the accreditation is on an individual basis. I know it seems obvious, but it's an important point. You are not accredited on behalf of your organisation, on behalf of your employer, but it is you who is accredited. Being accredited is a declaration of your principles. As you work forward, your client is really the building rather than the person who is employing you, if you like. Once you are accredited, your work must and should stand scrutiny. Your advice needs to be wholly independent and can therefore be scrutinised from a technical point of view as well as any point of view, really. And the key thing, I think, to get across is that care is a mindset. I think it was the case study of the Hill House, not the Hill House, sorry, I'm getting my Macintosh buildings mixed up. The Macintosh, sorry, was a particularly good one because all the attributes of the conservation accredited engineer there were about building empathy, awareness of how materials and structures perform, thinking from first principles. Actually, being a conservation accredited engineer, you can't rely on You can't fall back and hide behind current codes of practice for design and things. So it's a real test for you as an engineer. That's all I actually have to say now, Taylor. So I can stop now. Otherwise, I'll get onto some sort of philosophical chat, which is best done over a beer, and it's not no good. So, yes.
That's great. Thanks very much, Steve. So yeah, that basically that gives you an idea of what CARE is looking for. And I have to say, I have had a quick look at the case study that Steve is going to be talking about this afternoon, and it is a cracker of one. So if you can join us, there'll be some interesting things to talk about there. I think that brings us to a close for the morning sessions today. We're going to go ahead and have a lunch break. As I said before, in the chat, you do have your links there to register for whichever workshop you'd like to attend in the afternoon. We will also be recording those workshops. So if there's one that you prefer to attend on the day and then have the recording of the other one, that's completely fine. You'll get those recordings soon. And yeah, we've just got the links put back in the chat as well. So all the links for the workshops. And then we also do have our networking area, which we're going to be opening up about 1 o'clock. So if you'd like to come and join us, have a cup of coffee, chat about some conservation issues, maybe some of the things that have been raised in the presentations today, just come have a chat and get to know some faces across the sector as well. So yeah, that link is there in the chat, and it'll also be in that email that was sent to you a little bit earlier this morning. And that is pretty much all from me about this morning sessions and the afternoon. If you're not able to join us this afternoon, just to let you know what's going to be happening tomorrow. We're going to be hearing from Scott Abercrombie, who works with John Gilbert Architects. He is a RIBA conservation accredited architect, and he's going to just be talking about his journey into conservation accreditation. It was a little bit different, a little bit of a different journey than some of the ones that we've heard yesterday. So he's going to be talking about that. And then we're also going to be hearing from Graham Bell of the Cultura Trust. His presentation has the quite intriguing title of Beyond Your Ken, a career sans frontières in Europe. So he's going to be talking a little bit more about the European perspective. So far, we've been very much focused on Scotland and the UK. So he's going to be talking a little bit more about what's going on in Europe. So I hope you can join us tomorrow as well. Thanks, everyone. Have a good lunch.